Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And this morning on Cool Your Heels with Lillian, our special guests are Crystal and Leland Payton, who wrote a book together called Lovers Leap Legends, From Sappho of Lesbos to Wawa Tea of Waco. So good morning.
Good morning, Lillian. How are you?
I'm pretty good. That's quite a tongue twister, don't you think? Lovers Leaps Legends. Say that fast 4 times.
Well, yes, it is. But, that's true of what they are. They're actual legends, pieces of folklore or fake lore, as people like to call it sometimes. But they are across the country, and every one of them has a legend that has some similarity to all the others. And it has its roots in history, way back.
Yeah, they're profoundly unoriginal folklore.
Well, you can't always be Romeo and Juliet, can you now? And I'm sure if they knew of a cliff to hurtle themselves into the abyss, they probably would have done it, don't you think?
Absolutely, and they too are part of that long trajectory since Sappho leaped off the cliff down there in the Leucadian Sea. That long trajectory, Romeo and Juliet are definitely part of it.
Apparently, Sappho actually, there's no indication that she was, in fact, she was a lesbian with a capital L, because she was from the island of Lesbos, but her sexual proclivities are unknown. But there's no indication she jumped off a cliff. She was a well-known poet in the ancient world and quite highly regarded. But the playwright Meander, several hundred years after her death, just added that feature that she committed suicide over a disappointment in a love affair with a man.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. A lot of women are disappointed with love affairs with men. Well, that just is part of our vague history as well. Did you ever think of maybe trying to figure out the psychological aspects of why these people would rather commit death than to soldier on?
Actually, that's beyond our pay grade. That psychology, we never really did get, or if they adversely affect the image of Native Americans. Quite justifiably, Indians are sensitive to being portrayed by popular culture, but in this case, it's such a absurd premise that they don't seem to basically get upset about it.
The thing is, there's no basis in fact or reality for the stories that are told that are attached to these truly spectacular cliffs. I mean, every one of them has a magnificent view of the surrounding land and give you a sense of looking off into the future and into the world. But none of them have any reality in terms of the Indians that were supposed to have played out their romance on their edge. The story, the common thread in all the stories is that the young lovers were true to each other, but were obstructed from their marriage by the disapproving parents. So, hey, that still plays out in today's world somewhat, don't you think?
I would think so, and I also think that emotions are raw to all humans, and Indians, unfortunately, are human too, as is every other culture. Maybe Bigfoot is a leap, but outside of that, everybody's human. Behavior hasn't changed since we came down from the trees. We haven't evolved. So it's the perennial thwarted love with disapproval from parents thrown in, or grandparents, should they be bringing you up, for good measure. And in all cultures, there is a rigid bar on which is acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior.
Yeah, we wrote, previous to this, 2 books on rivers, damming the Osage and the James Fork of the White. And both of those we encountered legends that puzzled us. The one on the James Fork was called Virgin Bluff, and we never got to the bottom of why it was called that. And then there was one on Lake of the Ozarks.
Well, now it's Lake of the Ozarks. It's at that particular bluff was at the junction of the Niangua and the Osage rivers, and hence when we were doing damming the Osage, we found it. And it's quite complicated, and I think 3 people died in that one, the father as well. So, but interestingly enough, since the legend, since it was first published back at the turn of the last century, the river has been dammed, but now there's a big lake below that bluff. The bluff is still there, but now if you jumped off, you'd land in water, very deep water actually. But the thing was that the Ozarks, the Netflix series Ozark, the last episode of the first season, the family arrives down at Lake of the Ozarks where they're going to hide out from the cartel, the drug cartel. And the last scene of it is them gathered on Lover's Leap. We saw that and we just had to gasp.
Yeah, the point we made throughout the book, many of these are still popular gathering places for the view, and the legends are definitely diminished, and people have been skeptical off and on throughout the entire assertion of these. The Lover's Leap legends got started in America when Zebulon Pike went up the Mississippi River, and apparently a Scott Indian trader told him the sad story about an Indian maiden who committed suicide because her father denied her love of a brave from another tribe. So it was a crazy story, and immediately when it was published a few years later, they caught it in New York and realized that it was the retreaded Sappho legend. So that didn't bother anybody slowing down. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of cliffs across America that have these phony legends, but they're still, again, they have a beautiful view, so they're popular.
I would think so. So why do you think then people would be interested in past legends about Indians and Americans and probably Europeans throwing themselves off high places into grottos? Is there still a lot of romance attached to these things? I know with Romeo and Juliet, every parent of a teen girl has heard the angst from their 14 through 16-year-olds saying, well, Juliet did it.
Well, a cliff with a story is just more interesting than a cliff that's a geological phenomenon. People people want to attach the Native Americans to the landscape. They say mountain ranges resemble sleeping maidens and rivers. Of course, half the states are named for Indian tribes, so the Indian presence in America has always been strong and not always accurate in folklore and legend and history even.
It makes for a good day trip too if you've got a destination which has a reason for being, that has a romantic tale behind it, that has a beautiful scenery, and is part of the American culture or historical picture, I guess you could say.
And Americans are enormously sentimental, and why these are considered beautiful, sad stories, which used to bring a tear to the eyes of young maidens that went on a picnic to Lover's Leap, I don't know, but they're still, America's popular culture is pretty sentimental, wouldn't you say?
All right, so why don't we name some of the more popular, sentimental, tear-in-the-eye places? Spring is springing, apparently. I think the crocuses are already poking up through the soil. Why don't we give some places where people can go celebrate spring in a joyous, crying mood in the States? Why don't you name some states with places close to cities. So if people are adventurous this spring, they have a destination in mind.
Well, one of the sort of a combo Americana site and a Lover's Leap would be Hannibal, Missouri. They have a spectacular bluff at the end, and it's now a city park that overlooks the Mississippi, and you can see the town of Hannibal below. It's interesting in that Hannibal as well is Mark Twain's hometown, and Mark Twain, our good old Missouri hero, is the inspiration for our impulse to write the book. We knew of these other two Lovers' Leaps, but when we read in his Life on the Mississippi, he did a chapter on a section of the Mississippi where he was on the steamboat going up, and he ran into a garrulous passenger who told him a tale. So he made some sarcastic remarks. Mark Twain is known for some sarcasm, and it
just some
gelled. Correct. So, but it gelled the idea for us, and so that was actually our first personal trip to go photograph and look at and get a sense of these Lovers' Leap is the ones at Hannibal. It inspired us to do some traveling as well. It took us to Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, to Rock City, and down to Texas. We've been seeking them out and finding them still romantic and spectacular places. But Mark Twain's comment on it was pretty hilarious.
Yeah, Mark Twain knew that Lover's Leap existed in Hannibal. It's a very old story. They're all up and down the Mississippi since they started above Hannibal at Maiden Rock. That was the one that Pike first wrote about in 1807. And Crystal, why don't you read Mark Twain's comments about he encountered, as Crystal said, he encountered an old gentleman on a trip up the Mississippi in a riverboat when he was gathering material for Life on the Mississippi. And this loquacious old gentleman told him the story, and this is what Mark Twain wrote about it. And he had a decidedly negative view of sentimentality, which you can. Here's Mark Twain's.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Okay. We asked him to tell the tale. This is the loquacious old gentleman. We asked him to tell it. He dropped out of his conversational vein and back into his lecture gait without an effort and rolled on as follows. A little distance above Lake City is a famous point known as Maiden Rock, which is not only a picturesque spot, but is full of romantic interest from the event which gave it its name. Not many years ago, this locality was a favorite resort for the Sioux Indians on account of the fine fishing and hunting to be had there, and large numbers of them were always to be found in this locality. Among the families which used to resort here was one belonging to the tribe of Wabasha. Winona, firstborn, was the name of the maiden who had plighted her troth to a lover belonging to the same band, but her stern parents had promised her hand to another, a famous warrior, and insisted on her wedding him. The day was fixed by her parents to her great grief. She appeared to accede to the proposal and accompanied them to the rock for the purpose of gathering flowers for the feast. On reaching the rock, Winona ran to its summit and, standing on its edge, upbraided her parents who were below for their cruelty. Then, singing a death dirge, she threw herself from the precipice and dashed them in pieces on the rock below. Dashed who in pieces? Her parents? Yes.
Maybe she took them with them. What I'm surprised about is there's no paranormal activity around this place. To see her keep on throwing herself off that rock.
But there's more. He said, well, certainly it was a tragic business, as you say, and moreover, there's a startling kind of dramatic surprise about it, which I was not looking for. It is a distinct improvement upon the threadbare form of Indian legend. There are 50 Lovers' Leaps along the Mississippi from whose summit disappointed Indian girls have jumped, but this is the only jump in the lot that turned out in the right and satisfactory way. So Twain, that really and truly, that is the springboard for our impulse to do this book.
And we found other hard-bitten journalists that also, cast aspersions on the veracity of these phony legends. but that didn't slow it down. And we found there's hundreds and hundreds of old postcards that are called lovers' leaves. They made souvenirs put them on decorative plates made in Germany, and numerous other articles of decoration.
But have you noticed there is no male who's throwing himself off the rock?
Well, there actually are a couple of legends.
Or transgender people who are doing that?
Well, no, that wasn't a concept.
It's rare that the men jump off. The poor maidens are
the ones who are the sacrificial victims.
That's right.
Right.
Aren't we always a virgin? I'm sure if we had to render up a virgin to E.T., we would be sore put. Come on. Nobody over the age of 12 is a virgin these days. Come on.
We didn't get into that.
You didn't get into that. Okay, so...
Don't forget, these were being written primarily in the 19th century, maybe into the early 1900s, like at 10 or 12. And there was a primness and a properness about love at that time, remember?
Absolutely. You're still in the Victoria's age. And they were very suppressed, although you wouldn't guess it.
We had a contest discovering which was the corniest of them all, and we kept upping each other. I mean, we'd think we found the worst, most hideously sentimental story, and then a week later we'd find one that was even crazier. So they're kind of perversely funny. I mean, you know,
if you take them like Twain did, you know, they have their.
Well, I know there's a story, of course, she didn't get a chance to leap off. Her parents wanted to marry her to a much older man. This is something in the 12th century, and the girl refused, so they walled her up alive.
Yeah.
Yep.
In their castle, which I guess is the equivalent of committing suicide because you refused to marry somebody, which just about, even if it isn't true, who would make up such a horrible tale? Come on.
I think you were very perceptive when you brought up Romeo and Juliet. It just means that American culture is really indebted to European film.
Yes.
We haven't invented very much.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it, we are still a transplanted nation, and our myths and stories are derived from European, and that means from Greek and Roman sources.
Absolutely. And we haven't, and it also makes you wonder, for a country that was so hell-bent on trying to exterminate the Native American Indians, we have used their names and vocabulary words in every trail, city, state, sports team.
Well, you can also see these tales as we saw threads of people recognizing that they were a vanishing group, that we had done this extirpation, and they were and people became nostalgic even when they were still around. There were the Wild West shows, and the people became oh my God, we've almost lost what we just ran over with a train, you know.
Yeah. Yes, I was always amused with Buffalo Bill.
Right. But there was this sense of having a regret, a certain sentimental regret for what we had done, I think, embedded in this tale. Not very well.
There's another side to Buffalo Bill. Some people are think it was demeaning, but the Indians loved Buffalo Bill, and they loved the show because he permitted them to dress in their traditional costumes.
Yes, he gave them a lifeline when nobody else would.
And when they got back on the reservation, they had to dress like white people and go to church, and they had to abandon their original religion. So Buffalo Bill let them be real Indians.
Yeah.
And I think in these, as misguided as these Lovers' Leaf legends are, and as much of a crime against literature, they were intended to show that the Indians were as sentimental and as prone to commitment to each other and marriage as the European-derived culture.
And in some ways, they were even nicer, because in some of the tribes, they allowed them to divorce, to walk away, where in Europe, of course, You were property. You were allowed. Property wasn't allowed to do that.
The one exception to we devoted quite a bit of the book to Niagara Falls, which has a somewhat similar legend called Legend of the White Canoe, also called Maid of the Mist.
Yeah. Legend of the White Canoe.
And Indians did object finally in the last 20 years to it because the prominent method of the prominent postcard in Niagara Falls for decades was a picture of a nude Indian in a canoe going over the edge of Niagara Falls. And in case she didn't jump off a bluff, she went over Niagara Falls in a canoe. That's a sacrifice, not just as there's several versions. In some, she's a sacrifice to the river god, and that's what the Native American tribes up there, the Iroquois nation, objected to. Mm-hmm. In others, she is unhappy over a love affair. There's several versions of it.
Well, it's no worse than what they did down with the Mayas and the Aztecs, and with Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac to the Lord. So I pretty much think human nature plays a huge role in all of this, don't you think?
Well, I don't think that North American natives ever practiced human sacrifice. They were known early on to torture people, but not their own people as a sacrifice, like the Aztecs and the Mayas.
Or people who they caught in battle. That's true.
They're enemies.
Right. But and Lover's Leap legends are not solely in the North American continent. We've got them. In fact, a friend of mine was deployed by FEMA out to Saipan, and he said, "Hey, I've got to go over to Guam for a meeting. Where was that Lover's Leap you told me about?"
Oh, I want to check it out.
And he did. He went over and he took pictures. I've got a blog post coming out on that pictures, and he sent me a postcard and a souvenir. And if you've seen the book, we decorate. The illustrations are, for us to include a Lover's Leap, it had to have some kind of physical presence, some memorabilia, some ephemera to go with it, because there's probably more than we even were able to cover in this book. But he said these are contemporary. So I was really excited about the Guam, and that's an interesting tale as well. And we've got Jamaica in there, and Spain, and Ireland, and England. So it's not a totally localized phenomenon, but in our country, it was primarily centered on Native Americans, and we postulate that it was part of this idea to humanize and try to understand Native Americans in our own way, for who we are.
For who we are.
How they're like us, so that they're not as other as we first thought they were.
Yes. So, Leland and Crystal, tell everybody where one can find Lover's Leap Legends.
Well, thank you. Lover's Leap Legends is available on Amazon, through Barnes & Noble. It may not be in your local bookstore, but you can order it through them, or from our website, which is www.beautifulozarks, all one word, BeautifulOzarks.com.
Okay. And you can also find it on Amazon.com. Yep. BarnesandNoble.com, and the publisher's website, hypercommon.com.
Correct.
Great. And do you have anything else you would like to add before we close up?
It's a really gorgeous book. I mean, we spend a lot of money. It's all color. There's over 500 illustrations, and I think it's just fascinating not to read through maybe in one fell swoop, but to just dabble in these stories, and then you let the laughter die down, or the tears, however it hits you.
We've divided it up by region too, so you could just immediately jump to your own region. Texas has got a whole bunch of interesting stories,
full of sentimental stories.
And so it's like a random access book. You can go in and take pieces of it at a time as you have time, but there's plenty of meat there. There's a whole buffet to enjoy.
One thing we were shocked to find, a bunch of mainstream great American writers dabbled in these legends early on. They just couldn't leave it alone. So It's sort of shameful.
They put their own spin on them, did they?
Yeah. Oh, the variations are unbelievable.
And fun. They're fun to read.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the next time you go RVing in your camper, instead of telling some good ghost stories, because everybody's already heard them, you can swap Lovers Leap legends. Think about it. Start a new tradition. And if you wish to hear...
tourist attractions.
I'm always willing to start something new. And if you would like to hear this interview all over again with Crystal and Leland, you can go listen to it at PassionateWorldTalkRadio.com with an https:// in front of it all. Go to the right-hand side of the page, and you'll find Cool Your Heels. Click on it, and it'll take you to the interview. You will hear it also on iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, Podchaser, Podcatcher, Spreaker, amfm247.com /Lillian-Cauldwell, to name a few places. If you do not know how to use technology, and there are some 80 and older who do not know how to, but you do know how to use a phone, we have a sizzle line. Pick up your phone, dial up the number, and voila, you'll hear the interview automatically. And before you go away and stray, Joseph Conrad had this to say in 1911, a man's most open actions have a secret side to them. So until next time, stay tuned and listen for Passionate World Talk Radio. Have a good one.